In the grand, violent theater of the American Mafia, some names echo like gunshots in a quiet street. Capone, Luciano, Gotti, these are the men whose legends were printed in bold headlines and immortalized on the silver screen. But before them, there was another. A man whose name is often whispered, a foundational figure shrouded in the mists of the early 20th century. His name was Salvatore D'Aquila. He was not merely a boss, he was the original blueprint for the ultimate authority in the American underworld. They called him the Capo di tutti I capi, the boss of all bosses. This was a title he craved, a title he earned, and a title that would ultimately sign his death warrant. His story is not just about one man's rise and fall. It is the story of how the very structure of organized crime in America was born. His era was a time of transition. The old world of Sicilian honor and vendetta was crashing headlong into the new world of American ambition and commerce. D'Aquila stood at the crossroads of this collision. He was a man of tradition, yet he was also a pioneer of a new, more organized form of criminality. He understood that true power wasn't just about muscle or intimidation, it was about control over territory, control over rackets, and most importantly, control over other powerful men. His vision was to create a unified network, a criminal kingdom with himself as the undisputed king. This ambition set a dangerous precedent, igniting a hunger for absolute power that would define the mafia for generations to come. To understand D'Aquila, you must understand the world that made him. It was a world of poverty and prejudice, where Italian immigrants were often denied a legitimate path to the American dream. They arrived in a land that promised everything but often delivered very little. For men like D'Aquila, the established laws and societal norms were not a source of protection, but a barrier. So they created their own laws. They built their own society in the shadows of the one that had rejected them. This shadow society had its own rules, its own hierarchy, and its own brutal form of justice. Salvatore D'Aquila did not just join this world, he sought to master it, to bend it to his will. His journey is a chilling lesson in power. It teaches us that in the world of organized crime, the ascent is always perilous, and the view from the top is never secure. Every ally is a potential rival, and every handshake can conceal a dagger. D'Aquila's life was a constant, deadly chess match played on the grimy streets of New York. He moved his pieces with caution and cunning, eliminating threats and consolidating his influence. But in this game, there is no checkmate that lasts forever. The very title he fought so hard to claim, the boss of all bosses, became a target on his back, a shining prize for the next ambitious man waiting in the wings to take his shot at the king. Salvatore D'Aquila was born in 1873 in Palermo, Sicily. This was the cradle of the Mafia, an island where secret societies had flourished for centuries. They were born from a deep distrust of the state and a fierce code of self-reliance. In Palermo, a man's honor, his onorata, was his most valuable possession. Disputes were not settled in courtrooms but in back alleys, with words of warning or the sharp edge of a blade. D'Aquila was a product of this environment. He absorbed its lessons from a young age. He learned that respect was earned through fear, and that loyalty was a currency more valuable than gold. He was steeped in the traditions of the Cosa Nostra, the our thing, long before he ever set foot on American soil. In 1906, D'Aquila made the fateful journey across the Atlantic. He arrived in New York City, a sprawling, chaotic metropolis teeming with millions of other hopeful immigrants. He was just one face in a sea of many, settling in East Harlem, which was fast becoming a bustling Italian enclave. But D'Aquila was not like the others who came seeking honest work in factories or on construction sites. He carried with him the seeds of the Sicilian underworld. He saw the burgeoning Italian communities not just as a place to live, but as a fertile ground for recruitment and a territory to be controlled. He came to America not to build a new life but to build a new empire based on the old ways. He did not waste time. D'Aquila quickly connected with other ambitious men from the old country, men who shared his understanding of power and his disdain for American law. He began as an enforcer and a captain within the American Crime Family, the dominant Italian-American criminal organization in New York at the time. This was his apprenticeship. He watched, he learned, he saw the strengths and more importantly the weaknesses of the men in charge. He observed how they ran their rackets, how they settled disputes, and how they dealt with rivals. He was a patient student of crime, biding his time and building a network of loyal followers who were drawn to his quiet confidence and ruthless efficiency. His ambition soon outgrew his position. The Morello family was powerful, but D'Aquila saw its internal divisions and vulnerabilities. The family's leadership was in constant turmoil, with bosses being jailed or killed. This chaos was D'Aquila's opportunity. Around 1910 he broke away, taking a significant faction of loyalists with him. He didn't just leave, he established a rival power base in Brooklyn, directly challenging the Morello gang's supremacy. This was a bold and dangerous move. It was a declaration of war. Salvatore D'Aquila was no longer a soldier. He was now a general, ready to carve out his own kingdom in the concrete jungle of New York. The D'Aquila crime family was not born in a boardroom, it was forged in the shadows of Brooklyn. After splitting from the Morellos, Salvatore D'Aquila began to systematically build his organization. He recruited skilled and ruthless men, many of whom he knew from Sicily. He established a clear hierarchy, with himself at the very top. He was the patriarch, the undisputed leader whose word was law. Below him were his trusted lieutenants, his caparagimes, each responsible for a crew of soldiers. This structure provided both efficiency and insulation. Orders would flow down from D'Aquila, but he remained distanced from the day-to-day criminal acts, making it difficult for law enforcement to connect him directly to any crime. His family's influence spread like a stain across the borough. They specialized in the rackets that preyed on their fellow immigrants. Protection, or what came to be known as the Black Hand, was their bread and butter. Shopkeepers and businessmen would receive a letter demanding money, marked with a sinister black handprint. To refuse was to invite violence, a broken window, a fire, or worse. D'Aquila also controlled the docks, extorting shipping companies and controlling the unions. He had a hand in gambling, loan sharking, and the distribution of olive oil and cheese, legitimate businesses that served as fronts for his illicit activities. His organization was becoming a shadow government, providing services and enforcing contracts where the real government could not or would not. What set D'Aquila apart was his understanding of national, not just local power. While other bosses were content to rule their own neighborhoods, D'Aquila had a grander vision. He began to forge alliances with other Sicilian gang leaders across the country, from Cleveland to Chicago to New Orleans. He acted as a mediator, a judge in disputes between families. He understood that infighting weakened the collective power of the mafia. By positioning himself as a national arbiter, he was subtly building the foundation for something much bigger. He was creating the network that he would one day seek to rule as the ultimate authority, the boss of all bosses. The family he built was bound by more than just crime. It was bound by a strict code of conduct imported directly from Sicily. The Code of Omerta, the vow of silence, was absolute. To cooperate with the authorities was the ultimate betrayal, punishable by death. Loyalty to the family came before loyalty to God or country. This code created a closed, impenetrable world. It made the D'Aquila family incredibly difficult for outsiders, especially law enforcement, to understand, let alone infiltrate. This secret society, with its ancient traditions and brutal enforcement, became the most powerful criminal enterprise of its time, all under the firm and steady hand of its founder, Salvatore D'Aquila. Salvatore D'Aquila's criminal empire was a complex and sprawling enterprise, a web with threads reaching into nearly every aspect of life in Italian-American neighborhoods. At the heart of his operation was extortion. His men were masters of intimidation, preying on the fears of hard-working immigrants who were often too scared of the authorities to seek help. A small business owner, perhaps a baker or a butcher, would find his livelihood threatened by D'Aquila's soldiers. The demand was simple: pay a weekly tribute for protection. This was not protection from outside threats, but protection from D'Aquila's own men. It was a vicious cycle of fear and payment that filled the family's coffers and solidified their control over the community. Beyond simple extortion, D'Aquila was a pioneer in labor racketeering. He saw the immense power latent in the unions that were forming on the Brooklyn waterfront. By infiltrating and controlling these unions, he could dictate who worked and who didn't. He controlled the loading and unloading of cargo, allowing him to pilfer valuable goods from shipments with impunity. This control also gave him immense leverage over shipping companies who had to pay him off to avoid costly strikes and slowdowns. The docks became his personal fiefdom, a vital artery of commerce that pumped money and power directly into his organization. He was not just a gangster, he was a corrupt and powerful labor baron. The advent of Prohibition in 1920 was a gift from heaven for a man like D'Aquila. Suddenly, an entire nation was thirsty, and the law forbade the manufacture and sale of alcohol. This created a black market of unprecedented scale, and D'Aquila jumped in with both feet. He organized large-scale bootlegging operations, smuggling liquor from Canada and the Caribbean. He ran fleets of trucks and bribed countless police officers and federal agents to look the other way. The profits were astronomical, dwarfing anything he had made from his previous rackets. This new river of gold funded a massive expansion of his empire, allowing him to buy more influence, more weapons, and more loyalty. D'Aquila also ran more traditional rackets, like illegal gambling and loan sharking. His organization operated countless backroom card games and numbers rackets, draining money from the local populace. For those who fell into debt, his loan sharks were waiting. They offered quick cash at exorbitant interest rates. A borrower who failed to pay on time would face a brutal lesson in financial responsibility, often delivered with a baseball bat or a broken bottle. Through this combination of extortion, labor control, bootlegging, and loan sharking, D'Aquila built a diversified criminal portfolio that made him one of the wealthiest and most feared men in the American underworld. For a man who ran such a vast criminal network, Salvatore D'Aquila's official police record was remarkably thin. This was not a coincidence. It was a testament to his cunning and the effectiveness of his organization's code of silence. D'Aquila was a master at insulating himself from the crimes committed on his behalf. He rarely gave orders directly to the low-level soldiers who carried out the dirty work. Instead, messages were passed down through his trusted lieutenants, creating layers of separation that made it nearly impossible for prosecutors to trace a crime back to the man at the top. He was the unseen hand, the ghost in the machine, and his fingerprints were never on the weapon. His most notable brush with the law came not from his major rackets, but from a seemingly minor offense. In the early days, before his empire was fully established, he faced charges related to counterfeiting. He was allegedly involved in a scheme to print and distribute fake currency. While the charges were serious, the evidence was circumstantial, and key witnesses were either too intimidated to testify or suddenly developed selective amnesia on the stand. Ultimately, D'Aquila was able to beat the rap. This experience taught him a valuable lesson. The American legal system could be manipulated. It could be defeated by fear, bribery, and the unwavering silence of his men. Throughout his reign, D'Aquila was the subject of intense police surveillance. Detectives followed him, federal agents tapped his phones, yet they could never build a solid case against him for the major crimes everyone knew he was committing. He lived a life of calculated caution. His public persona was that of a respectable businessman and importer of Italian goods. He contributed to local charities and attended church. This respectable facade was a deliberate strategy designed to deflect suspicion and create a narrative of legitimacy. He moved quietly, avoided ostentatious displays of wealth, and conducted his most important business in secret, far from prying eyes and ears. His ability to evade conviction became part of his legend. It enhanced his aura of invincibility among his followers and rivals. It seemed as though he was untouchable, protected by a combination of Sicilian cunning and a powerful code of silence. While lesser mobsters were frequently arrested and jailed, D'Aquila remained free, ruling his empire from the shadows. This lack of a significant criminal record is, ironically, the greatest proof of his power and influence. It demonstrated a level of control and discipline that few other bosses could ever hope to achieve, solidifying his status as a man who operated above the law. The title of, or boss of all bosses, was not an official position one was elected to. It was a title of recognition, an informal acknowledgement of supreme power in the American Mafia. It belonged to the man who was considered the most powerful, the most respected, and the most feared boss in the country. After the decline of the Morello family, whose leader Giuseppe Morello had held a similar status, a power vacuum emerged. Salvatore D'Aquila, with his national network of alliances and his powerful Brooklyn-based family, was the natural successor. By the early 1920s, he was widely regarded by his peers as the first among equals, the final arbiter of inter-family disputes. D'Aquila actively sought and cultivated this status. He understood that being the boss of all bosses was about more than just brute force. It was about influence. He used his position to mediate conflicts between crime families in different cities, preventing costly wars that would attract unwanted attention from law enforcement and disrupt business. His rulings were considered final. To defy a decision from D'Aquila was to risk isolation from the wider network, or worse, a declaration of war from D'Aquila and his allies. He was in effect the Chief Justice of a secret Supreme Court for the underworld, and his authority was backed by the implicit threat of violence. However, this crown was heavy and lined with thorns. The very title that signified his ultimate success also made him the ultimate target. Every ambitious young mobster, every rival boss, looked at D'Aquila and saw what they wanted to become. His position was a constant source of envy and resentment. Men like Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria, a former D'Aquila lieutenant, began to see D'Aquila's traditional Sicily first approach as outdated. Masseria was building his own power base in Manhattan, recruiting younger, more aggressive gangsters who cared less for old-world traditions and more for cold, hard cash. The stage was being set for a generational conflict. D'Aquila's quest for this title changed the very nature of the American Mafia. It introduced the concept of a single paramount leader. Before him, crime families were largely independent entities. D'Aquila's ambition created a more centralized, albeit unofficial structure. This idea of a single, all-powerful boss would become a central theme in Mafia history. It fueled the ambitions of men who followed, like Masseria and later Salvatore Maranzano. They all wanted the same thing D'Aquila had: absolute control. His pursuit of the title created a dangerous precedent, ensuring that the top position in the underworld would always be a bloody and contested throne. The Great Mafia War of the late 1920s, known as the Castellamarese War, did not begin with a gunshot. It began with whispers, with shifting allegiances and simmering resentments. At its core was a clash between two visions for the future of the Mafia. On one side was the reigning boss of all bosses, Salvatore D'Aquila, and his successor in spirit, Joe Masseria. They represented the established power structure. On the other side was a formidable group of mobsters who hailed from the Sicilian seaside town of Castellammare del Golfo. These men, led by figures like Salvatore Maranzano, were fiercely traditional and resented the authority of the non-Castellamarese bosses. D'Aquila found himself caught in the middle of this brewing storm. He viewed the rising power of Joe Masseria with suspicion. Masseria was his own creation, a man who had risen through the ranks under his tutelage. But now, Masseria was becoming too powerful, too independent. At the same time, D'Aquila was deeply wary of the Castellamarese faction. He saw them as a direct threat to his national authority. In an attempt to consolidate his power and neutralize his rivals, D'Aquila began to act against members of both sides. He allegedly ordered the deaths of several key mobsters, hoping to clip the wings of his ambitious rivals before they could take flight. This was a dangerous game of manipulation. D'Aquila was trying to play both sides against each other, but his actions only served to unite his enemies against him. Joe Masseria in particular saw D'Aquila not as an ally but as an obstacle. He wanted the title of boss of all bosses for himself. He saw D'Aquila's traditional ways as a weakness and believed a more ruthless, aggressive leader was needed to navigate the lucrative but violent world of prohibition. Masseria began to secretly plot against his former mentor, forging his own alliances and preparing to make his move for the throne. The whispers of war were growing louder, turning into open threats. The conflict was a complex web of betrayals and assassinations that would eventually engulf the entire New York underworld. D'Aquila's attempts to maintain control through strategic violence backfired spectacularly. Instead of quelling the rebellion, he fueled it. He had created too many enemies, and his authority, once unquestioned, was now being openly challenged. The very power he had spent 2 decades building was beginning to crumble around him. He was a king who was rapidly losing the loyalty of his court, surrounded by ambitious princes who were sharpening their knives and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The war was coming, and D'Aquila was its first major target. The end for Salvatore D'Aquila came swiftly and without ceremony. On October 10, 1928, he was walking down Avenue A in Manhattan. It was a cool autumn day. D'Aquila was likely on his way to a doctor's appointment, feeling secure in his power, perhaps underestimating the immediacy of the threats against him. He was the boss of all bosses, a man who had survived and thrived in the brutal underworld for over 20 years. He probably believed he was untouchable, but in the world he had helped create, no one was untouchable. As he walked, a car pulled alongside him. Men emerged, guns in hand. The quiet street was shattered by a volley of gunfire. Salvatore D'Aquila fell to the pavement, his reign ending in a pool of blood on a public sidewalk. He was 54 years old. The assassination was professional, brutal, and public. It was a message. The hit was widely attributed to the orders of his ambitious rival Joe Masseria, who immediately moved to absorb D'Aquila's vast criminal empire and claim the coveted title of boss of all bosses for himself. D'Aquila's death marked a pivotal moment. It was the opening salvo in the Castellamarese War, a bloody conflict that would rage for years and claim the lives of dozens of mobsters, including Masseria himself. The king was dead, and the fight for his crown had begun in earnest. His downfall was a direct result of his own ambition. The very title he had worked so hard to achieve, the symbol of his ultimate power, became the reason for his murder. By positioning himself as the supreme ruler, he made himself the primary target for every other mobster who wanted that power. He had flown too close to the sun, and his fall was as dramatic as his rise. His story serves as a cautionary tale in the annals of the Mafia. The man at the top is always standing on a trapdoor. His murder demonstrated a fundamental truth of the underworld. Power is never permanent and loyalty is always conditional. The D'Aquila crime family did not die with him. It fractured, with most of its members and operations being taken over by Joe Masseria. However, a significant portion of the family's core would later re-emerge and evolve into what would become known as the Gambino Crime Family, one of the most powerful and enduring criminal organizations in American history. In this way, D'Aquila's legacy continued, even after his death. The dynasty he founded outlived him, adapting and transforming through the violent decades that followed, a testament to the powerful foundation he had laid. But his death signaled the end of an era and the dawn of a new, even more violent chapter in the history of the American Mafia. Salvatore D'Aquila's ultimate legacy is not found in the headlines he avoided, but in the structure of power he created. He was the man who first institutionalized the idea of a single national leader for the American Mafia. His pursuit of the title boss of all bosses established a dangerous but alluring blueprint for absolute authority. This concept would dominate the psychology of the Mafia for the next half-century. After his murder, Joe Masseria claimed the title only to be killed by men loyal to Salvatore Maranzano. Maranzano then formally declared himself the new, before he too was assassinated by a rising star named Charles Lucky Luciano. Luciano, a protege of Masseria, learned from the bloodshed. He saw that the singular pursuit of the boss of all bosses title was a recipe for endless war and instability. After eliminating Maranzano, Luciano did something radical. He abolished the title. In its place he established the Commission, a ruling council composed of the bosses of the most powerful crime families. This was a direct response to the chaos spawned by D'Aquila's original ambition. Luciano's commission was designed to prevent any one man from accumulating too much power, replacing the dictatorship of a single boss with a criminal oligarchy that could mediate disputes and maintain order. Even so, the ghost of D'Aquila's ambition never fully vanished. The dream of becoming the supreme leader, the most powerful and feared man in the underworld, continued to tempt powerful bosses. Figures like Vito Genovese and John Gotti, in later decades, would be accused of trying to dominate the commission and become a de facto boss of all bosses. The allure of that ultimate prize, first defined by D'Aquila, proved to be an irresistible force in the ego-driven world of the Mafia. His story became a foundational myth, a tale of what a man could achieve and the price he would have to pay for it. Salvatore D'Aquila, the quiet Sicilian from Palermo, forever changed the shape of organized crime in America. He was more than just a gangster, he was an architect. He designed a structure of power, built a dynasty that would evolve into the Gambino family, and created a title so coveted that it led to decades of bloodshed. He demonstrated how to build an empire on fear and silence, and his death showed how quickly such an empire could fall. In the long, dark history of the American Mafia, his name may not be the most famous, but his influence is undeniable. He was the original, the man who first dared to crown himself king.